Now, once we understand what exactly is now that we have done risk assessment, we have done the risk analysis, and we have come up with some figures as well when it comes to risk. Now, what do we do? Let's say you come up with a figure of risk that a risk to a certain asset is 8 out of 10, or risk to a certain application is, let's say, 5 out of 10, or risk to a certain process is, let's say, 4 out of 10. Now, once you have arrived at these numbers, what do you do? How do you handle the risk from there on? That is where these risk handling options or risk treatment options come. Okay. These are the different ways in which you can handle the risk based on your company's risk appetite or risk threshold. So your company's risk policy may say that if the risk score is 7 or below, we can accept the risk, we can tolerate the risk. But if the risk score is 7 or above, or maybe above 7 on a scale of 1 to 10, then we must put certain controls in place to bring the risk down to 7 or even lower. Okay. So based on your company's risk management policy, you can take the required decisions. So these are the 4 ways in which you can handle the risk. Now let's talk about let's unpack these 4 ways one by one. So let me first talk about mitigation, because this is the most common option that you will see in real life. So risk handling option number one is mitigate. What do we mean by mitigate here? Sorry, it is hidden. I'm not able to. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, so what do we mean by mitigation of risk? So this option here means that you reduce the risk, you mitigate the risk to an acceptable level by implementing certain controls, certain safeguards, certain countermeasures. Okay, most of the times it will cost you money. You will need to apply some new solution, some new control or something. But even if it is not about money, you will need to put in some effort, some solution in place so that the risk can be brought down to an acceptable level. That is what is meant by mitigation. So for example, in the previous example like the earlier example that I was giving you, where you have enabled telnet on a router, you find that the risk is too high to be left alone. In that case, if you want to mitigate the risk, what options do you have? You can disable telnet, right? Or you can replace telnet with SSH, because SSH is encrypted, so that is a better option. Or if you want, you can also remove the telnet access on the router from the internet. You can say that people need to be inside the network to be able to access the router, so that they are not able to access it from the internet. These are just some of the ways to reduce the risk to an acceptable level. So that is the first option, which is mitigate. Now let's talk about this option here, number two, which is accept. So what do we mean by accepting the risk? Accepting the risk means living with the risk without implementing any control or countermeasure. So you would accept the risk when the risk is maybe too high, or when the cost of the control is that you would have to implement is just way too high than the benefit that you would get by putting in that control. Or maybe the damage potential is really low. In that case, you could accept the risk. Okay. So let's say that you are traveling in a train, okay, and you are going to be carrying a book because you don't want to get bored on the train, so you want to read the book. Now there is a risk that that book could get stolen on the train. Okay. Now you figure out that you don't want the book to be stolen. So what do? You say that, all right, I could carry, if I don't want the book to be stolen, I could carry some kind of a special case or some lock so that you can lock your bag while you're away so that the book does not get stolen, right? However, after analyzing it, you figure out that, hey, carrying a lock or maybe carrying a separate bag or carrying a special case for the book will be too much of hassle. So you don't want to go through that hassle. So you figure out that you want to accept the risk because what is the worst that could happen? The book could get stolen, right? In which case you can buy the same book again from some other store, right? So in this case, you analyzed the risk and you said it is too much of hassle, too much of effort to put the controls in place. You would rather live with the risk, because the damage that could happen with because of that risk taking place can easily be reduced by purchasing another book, right? So that is an example of accepting the risk. You live with the risk without implementing any control or countermeasure. The opposite of accepting the risk is avoiding the risk. What do we mean by avoiding the risk? Avoiding the risk means terminating the activity that introduced the risk, which means that you are about to undertake an activity, you analyze the risk, and you say that, hey, the risk is just way too high. in comparison to the benefit that we are going to be getting from this activity, and we cannot afford to bear the losses that could happen because of this, because if this risk were to materialize. So let's not undertake this activity at all. That is called avoiding the risk. So let's say you have a company, and your company is thinking or is planning to acquire another company in some other country. Okay. And the benefit is that if that acquisition goes successful, then the company could see a huge uptick in its yearly profits. It could see an additional revenue of millions of dollars every year because of that new acquisition, which is a great benefit for the company. However, the company, after analyzing the risk, also finds out that, hey, if this acquisition were to fail, maybe because of the country in which that new company is located, it has a very unstable political situation. And if that unstable political situation could materialize, then it could actually lead to the closure of that company in that country. And if that were to happen, then the loss for your company could be in millions and billions of dollars, right? So you see that the risk is too high in comparison to the benefit that you could get. So the company decides to not go ahead with the acquisition. That would be an example of avoiding the risk, terminating the activity that introduced the risk. Okay. Next one is, the last option is to transfer the risk. What do we mean by transfer the risk? Transfer the risk means transferring the risk to another party, for example, by taking insurance or outsourcing the activity. Now, a typical example of outsourcing the risk is taking insurance, like, for example, taking your car insurance, which means that if that damage were to happen, then the damage will be borne by the insurance company, not directly by you. Okay, that is an example of taking insurance. Nowadays, we have cyber insurance as well, where companies are insured against cyber breaches, so that if a breach were to happen, then the damage caused because of the breach will be borne by the insurance company. That is an example of transferring the risk to another party. Another example is outsourcing the activity, where you outsource certain activity to another company because your company does not have the expertise of carrying out that activity on its own, because you don't have the right people, the right manpower, the right knowledge to carry out that activity. So it is better to have that activity, to get that activity performed by some other company that has the required expertise and the manpower, because that will reduce your risk as well. That is another example of transferring the risk. So these are the four ways in which risk can be handled. You can avoid the risk, you can accept the risk, you can transfer the risk, or you can mitigate the risk. Okay.